Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everyone. Let me just acknowledge the Wadawurrung people and say what a great honour it is to be the caboose in your fast train of speakers tonight. So when Lauren and Erin asked me to talk, they asked me to talk about a historical story about fire. So I've squeezed in fire, Californians, wild colonials, and fire. So folks, I'm a historian of the gold rushes. I'm currently writing a book about Britain and California. And so my interest, I guess, is on gold rushes around the world and how they also inform our own Australian gold rush. And that's my connection to Sovereign Hill, working with the team here. And the story I want to tell you tonight, I guess, is a bit of a prequel to Sovereign Hill. So when we think of Australia and California, we think of Hargraves, who's the guy who went to California, came home and discovered gold in Australia. We might think of the scenes on Main Street, the New York Bakery or the US Hotel. But I'm here to say that unfortunately that's not the real story that we need to understand when we think of Australia and the California gold rush. So okay, back to the start. So January 1848, gold is found at Sutter's Mill in California, probably the best, most important piece of shovel work in human history. James Marshall strikes gold digging a race for this mill in California. All of a sudden, the news takes a bit of time to get out in those days, gets to Australia about Christmas of that year, so about 10 months later. But all of a sudden the news is rifting out across the world. You can see this wonderful image here of some New York chaps reading the news from California, thinking about going and joining the gold rush. So the news is coming out all over the world. People are starting to get excited about the rush for gold, a chance to escape the misery of day-to-day life. This is a London newspaper showing basically making anything you can get that will float to get to California, to escape your life in the drudgery of industrial Britain. Very much the same sort of vibe happening in Australia. What a way to escape the drudgery of life, go and mine gold in California. This cartoon really represents people from the east coast of America, so Boston, New York. You can see the ships heading off to California. People that can't fit on the ship have built airships and rocket machines and anything you can do to get to this great gold rush on the other side of the world. Now, our story. So how does fire play a part in this? Well, this huge human congregation happens in California. People from all over the globe meet in California. Mining gold, for anyone who's panned for gold over here, is actually much harder than it looks, obviously, so people are working very hard. They've invested huge amounts to commit to this process of joining the California gold rush. San Francisco, which had been a town of about 800 people, booms. So it goes to 30,000 people, 60,000 people 5 years later. So this tiny village becomes this enormous sprawling city. Now, into this city pour the Australians, who we might like to think of them as these kind of like movie stars and Margot Robbie, and that's Australia and California. So in the gold rush, the Australians run the red light districts, the bars, the brothels, the nastiest, meanest parts of town, known as Sydney Town on Telegraph Hill if you've been to San Francisco. Now, what they prove very good at is crime. And the best way, of course, to cause trouble and to rob is to set massive fires. And so they set this enormous fire on the 4th of May, 1851, known as the Fifth Great Fire of San Francisco, lit by these Sydney convicts in order to create chaos so they can loot. And I can hear you all laughing, but just to give you a sense of the scale of the devastation, this is what the people of San Francisco wake up to the next morning. All of a sudden, this becomes a very dangerous place to be Australian. The people of San Francisco gather and decide we're no longer going to tolerate these lawless convicts within our midst. And so what do? Well, like good Americans, they turn to violence. And so this is the age of the great San Francisco Committee of Vigilance, which basically sets about hunting down Australians, gathering them from the slums of San Francisco, and as you can see here, slinging up the worst offenders in a time of low justice. So the first criminal, John Jenkins, who you saw before, is hanged in June 1851. The second, who you can see here, James Stewart, is hanged in July 1851 as a signal, as a warning to these Australians that you cannot ply your nasty convict ways in free California. And this really sets off the process by which Australians start to be expelled from California. Of course, it's in August that gold is also discovered at Clunes and Buninyong. And so all of a sudden, if you're an Australian at Sonoma or San Francisco, you think maybe I'll go home pretty quickly. So this very famous illustration, I think, is my favourite one. So in the middle, our Sydney convict, or Sydney duck as he's known, with his flaming torch, with his matches. You can see the shavings and things at his feet. This is our nasty Australian in the middle of the picture. Now, if I just split it to the side for you. So on one side, all the sorts of people that should be stopping this in an ideal society. So the judge, the policeman, the courthouse at the back there. You can see the prison. To the relief of the vagabonds, prisoners are supplied with every luxury and allowed to carry the keys to their cells. So the Australians are such good criminals, they've managed to seduce all the official organs of power. To the other side then, how do you deal with this? The stout American miner, the independent miner, who's going to drag the Sydney convict away through the crowd to the gallows at the back. And there's a nice little stopping the boats moment in that by this stage they stop the boats in San Francisco harbour and turn them back to Sydney. So what does all this mean? Our wild colonial boy here. Well, I think one of the big stories I think that we miss when we think about the Australian gold rush is the prequel, which is this story in San Francisco. When we think of Americans in Australia, we think of maybe Eureka, we think of, seeing Yankee Doodle Dandy, etc. You can see von Gerard's famous painting here from the gallery with the stars and stripes flying. But actually, the key story, I think, is this story linked by gold, wild colonials, fire, and California.